So thank you to everybody for attending our webinar today, which is a basic introduction to using the internet with JAWS screen reader software. Today's webinar will be presented mostly by Danny Keogh, who some of you may well know, who's our support officer with the software here, based down in Melbourne, and I'm Rebecca Clark, who's been organising these webinars and presenting some of them, and I'm in the Sydney office. Okay, so I'll just give a brief overview of what Danny will be covering in today's webinar. First of all, he'll give a bit of an introduction to JAWS and how it works in with the internet, and a bit of a background to how that was developed. He will then talk about the virtual cursor in JAWS and how that works in with the internet. He'll go through how you can bring up lists of elements and talk about what an element on a web page is. And he'll also talk about the quick navigation keys that are available to rapidly move around on a web page. He will also discuss, what happens if you try and use the mouse with JAWS, and why that's not necessarily a good idea. And he'll also go through what forms mode is and the difference between this and the virtual cursor. So without further ado, I shall hand over to Danny. So there we go, and he can start the presentation.
Okay, all going well. We should be able to see a little bit of an Internet Explorer page up. I will explain the page up in front of you shortly, because no self-respecting web designer would ever design a web page that looks anything like that. But I will explain as to why I've done that very shortly. Okay, a little bit of an introduction. And I'm hoping to cover today a couple of things. And as we already said, this webinar is really more aimed at people who are either working with or maybe parents of, or trying to teach people, have some sort of interaction with JAWS users and the internet. So it's really aimed at explaining to fully sighted or even some partially sighted people what they will expect, how JAWS works with the internet, and to a certain extent why it works the way it does, because the why is also important as well. So I'll have a couple of examples. I'll be going through a couple of examples of really basic web pages, and we won't just be concentrating on this little one up in front of us. We will actually do some real internet at some point. I will also show you exactly what JAWS will do to a particular page. Okay, so some terminology that we can get out of the way first, and a little bit of background as well. Previous to about Internet Explorer version 5, so we're going back to the very late 90s, around about 1998 or 99. JAWS at that stage was on version 3.2. And Internet Explorer was version 4. Now we're dealing with pre-Windows XP, so we're sort of going back maybe about 15 years or so. There were a lot of issues in terms of getting access to what was happening, and of course at that point most people would be aware that the internet was really starting to take off. A lot of people were getting access to it. There was a lot of content starting to appear. That was just around about the time before 100,000 companies all showed up in the early 2000s, and subsequently 90% of them went broke about 2 years later. So the internet was really just starting to take off at that point. Now, back then, you had all sorts of issues getting access to what was going on the screen. Basically, what you had to do was listen to the entire page, try and remember what text was on it, and muddle your way through the links. That's about all you could do. You really couldn't do too much else under Windows with programs like JAWS. Now, when Internet Explorer version 5 was released, what happened at that point was all of the screen reader manufacturers basically got together with Microsoft and said we need an easier way to get access to what is going on here. There were two ways of doing that. Number one is they could allow the screen readers to get direct access to the code that makes up a web page. Now, for those of you who don't know, web pages are made up of what's called HTML, which stands for Hypertext Markup Language. And it's basically a way of formatting pages. I can actually show you an example of that. We're gonna... Okay, maybe not. Okay, that's all right. Basically, it's a way of writing. It's basically a way of formatting text, introducing links, throwing in graphics, changing font, all of that type of stuff. And it really just allows you to format the page and actually construct the page. Now that's made up of a series of what are called tags, which are basically little blocks of text, little commands that are enclosed in brackets. So that was one way of doing it, where the screen reader could get direct access to the HTML code, try and nut out what was going on, and then format the page and sort of work itself out and try and do things with it. Now that would have been extremely cumbersome even back then, and now would just be impossible. It could not possibly happen now because things are far more complex 15, 16 years later than what they were then. So the other way to do it, and this is the way they went down, this is the path they followed, was to open up the back end of Internet Explorer and say, okay, screen readers can get access to what's going on off the screen. So they could actually get access to all of the different bits of a page, where that was on the screen, how it was made up, without having to analyze all of the HTML code. And there was a standardized interface for doing that. So the next thing was, okay, that's fine, so screen readers can get access to the page. So how can you navigate that page? How can you then look at a website and think, how am I going to get around this? Because one thing to realize with a program like JAWS is it reads line by line. So it'll read from the left of the screen straight across to the right of the screen. Now, most of you will instantly see some serious issues with that with websites, because you can have links down the left-hand side, text on the right, you can have graphics in the middle, you can basically put stuff wherever you choose on a website. Doesn't matter where you put it. There's things all over the place. You get sites with a whole series of links, one after the other, right across the top of the screen. There's sites where parts of it refreshes. Maybe the left-hand side of the page stays the way it is and the right-hand side completely changes. It would make it totally impossible. You could not read a website line by line. The other problem they also had was that there was no way to actually get around a web page like you could a document. There is no cursor. Internet Explorer does not have a cursor. You can't use your arrow keys and move around like you can inside Microsoft Word. So what they did then was they introduced what was called the virtual cursor. So what that allowed people to do was to simulate a cursor. You don't see it on the screen, but the JAWS user does. They know where it is. They can move around a document. They can move around a web page exactly the same as you would a document. So that's line by line, letter by letter, word by word. They can copy text. They can select it. They can copy it into other programs, exactly the same as anybody else could do on any other website. So they then had to find a way to say, okay, you need to know what a link is. You need to know where links are. You need to know where the buttons are. You need to know what is just plain text, what isn't plain text, if there's anything in a list, if there's tables. All of these things had to be built on to give you full access to the page. But they still had the problem of, that's all fine, but how do you get across pages with multiple columns? You have a whole series of links, one after the other, all on the same line. How do you get around that? So what they did was they said, let's split the page up. let's reformat everything down the left-hand side of the page and work it that way. So links will be underneath each other. Every link will be on its own line. Plain text will just follow on from what it needs to be. Tables will be formatted all down the left-hand side, and yes, there are commands to navigate tables. We won't be going into those today. So that was basically what they did. So the page that's up in front of me here, as you can see, has a title at the top. We then have a heading which says Quantum Webinar. We then have 3 links. One to the Freedom Scientific homepage, to the Quantum page, and into Google. Now they're all across in a straight line. We then have a block of text underneath, and then underneath that a graphic. So what does a JAWS user actually see? What actually comes up for a JAWS user? Because on the screen, and I'm actually running JAWS here at the moment, you won't hear it speaking. I'll change that shortly. I will bring it up so that you will hear it speaking shortly. At this point in time, you don't need to. Okay, so I'll just give a brief overview of what Danny will be covering in today's webinar. First of all, he'll give a bit of an introduction to JAWS and how it works in with the internet, and a bit of a background to how that was developed. He will then talk about the virtual cursor in JAWS and how that works in with the internet. He'll go through how you can bring up lists of elements and talk about what an element on a web page is. And he'll also talk about the quick navigation keys that are available to rapidly move around places in the on a web page. He will also discuss, what happens if you try and use the mouse with JAWS, and why that's not necessarily a good idea. And he'll also go through what forms mode is, and the difference between this and the virtual cursor. So without further ado, I shall hand over to Danny. So there we go, and he can start the presentation. So thank you to all of you for attending our webinar, and thanks to Danny for your really interesting presentation. Thank you, Danny, for that, and thanks to everyone for attending today's webinar. If you do think of further questions later on, or have any feedback about these webinars, or are interested in actually a demonstration or need some more assistance with JAWS, you can always contact us on either by phone on 1300 883 853, or you can email us at info@quantumrlv.com.au, or you can email myself or Danny individually. And you can always find some information on our website as well. I will send around the different... No. I can also make available the information that Danny was talking about the resources that Freedom Scientific, the manufacturers of JAWS, produce, and where you can find that information, and so write down the answers we had to the questions. What happens for a JAWS user? What information do they get, and how is it represented when you're moving through a screen as a JAWS user? Well, let's have a look. Let's bring up a Word document. That is what a JAWS user, that is how a JAWS user would see the page. So we have the title at the top, JAWS and the Internet, heading level 1, Quantum. Now, what I've written here is an exact text representation of the speech output that you would get. And I'll run through the page very shortly and sort of give you a bit of an idea of what actually happens here. So that is an exact representation of the speech that JAWS will give you, heading level 1. With HTML, you have different ways of doing headings. There's 2 things you can do. You can either make something look like a heading just by changing the format and centering it, JAWS won't see that as a heading because it doesn't know what to look for. It doesn't know that that text isn't meant to be centered and that the font is the way it is. So there are specific heading tags, and I explained what tags were before with HTML with the actual formatting. There are specific tags for headings, there's specific ones for all sorts of different forms of formatting, and as long as you stick to those, then JAWS will know what's actually going on. So we then have underneath that, we have link Freedom Scientific homepage, which is exactly what JAWS will say. It will say the words link Freedom Scientific homepage. The word link comes first, so that tells me I can click on that if I'm on a homepage. If I'm on a website, I can then press that link and it will take me somewhere. So as you can see, what was across the screen what was across the screen is now vertical. So that's a representation of what you would get. You then have the text underneath it, welcome to the text and the JAWS in the Internet webinar, etc., etc. And then underneath that we have the word graphic. So that says we're on a picture, and then Quantum logo is what's called an alternative text label. That does not appear on the screen, but they are put in specifically for screen readers and other programs like it to get access to, and it's used as it's kind of like a caption. So if you write your page properly, every graphic should be labeled so that anyone who's going across it will have a little bit of an idea of exactly what it is you're talking about. Okay, so before we go any further with that, because that's a lot of information, do we have any questions?
No, that sounds like a no. I don't think we've got anything in the chat box. Okay, I think we'll go ahead, Danny.
Yeah, okay, no problems. We've still got a... All right. So that's a really, really simple representation of what's actually going on. So I'll close this and go back to here again. Now, you can do all sorts of things with this. You can get all kinds of information. So the next thing I'll be doing is, let's bring up something that everybody should be familiar with. Okay, everybody's familiar with Google. Anybody who's used the internet will know about it, will have used it, will know exactly how it works. Okay, so this site's getting a little bit more complicated because we have a couple of things in here which you wouldn't think would actually work, but they do. So what I'll do is, we'll bring it up here. So obviously you've got all of your links across the top, the +U, the Gmail images, all that stuff across the top. So we have, at the top we've got Google, then we have the links, +U, Gmail, images. Now, here's where we get a little bit strange. We have here something which says, and this is, and trust me, this is exactly what JAWS will say, and I'll demonstrate it shortly. Link collapsed has pop-up apps. Now that's a lot of information to take in, but it's telling me a couple of things here. Number one, it's telling me to link. Number two, because it says collapsed, it's telling me that if I press that link, it's going to give me more links underneath it, or more links somewhere on the page to do with that particular thing. So it'll bring up another little box or another little window, whatever it happens to be, with some more options in there. Has pop-up, so that tells me the same thing. So collapsed has pop-up basically is telling me that it's currently closed. The pop-up is not there, but there is going to be one if I press that. And then obviously apps is exactly what it is. Now, if I go through that with the virtual cursor in here, basically, if I move letter by letter, I don't see link has pop-up collapsed. That's not there. All I see is apps. because the other information is information given to me by the screen reader. Okay, so obviously at that point, if I then press that link, we would end up with a whole bunch of other stuff that opens up, and the whole layout of that page will completely change. Okay. Now, so obviously we've got the other links, sign in, etc. Now, we're at search region. This, again, is a speech representation. So the word search region do not appear on the screen. A region is a way of splitting a page into multiple areas, and if they're used properly, they can make life incredibly easy and amazingly fast to get around. You could literally just jump from one whole section of a page to another without even having to think about where you're going, without having to do searches, without having to actually try and find text. The perfect example of a place where that would be amazingly useful, and the one place where it is not used effectively, is newspapers for getting to the actual article text. Probably the one place they should be using it, they're not. I've seen them used in all sorts of places where they probably shouldn't be, but anyway, I'll get into that shortly with the do's and don'ts of what actually not to do. Okay, so it then says search. It'll then say the word edit, which basically tells me that that is the edit field where I need to be. Google search button, I'm feeling lucky, etc., etc., etc. So that is what will happen here. Okay, let's close that. Now, what I'm going to do at this point is I'll actually going to channel JAWS through, because the virtual cursor doesn't only allow you to move through letter by letter, and I'll do a quick demonstration of the virtual cursor as well. So just bear with me for a second.
Leaving menus.
New tab page.
Google.
Okay. So let's see what happens as I move down. We'll get the actual output from JAWS. So
Google.
I'm at the top of what it thinks is the top of the page. Now, unfortunately, and it would be really, really useful, and it is something we have requested that Freedom Scientific do, is at this point, now this is JAWS version 15 with Internet Explorer 11, there is no visual representation of where the virtual cursor actually is. Now that would be something that would be incredibly useful for situations like this. We have requested it, so we'll just have to see what actually comes of that request. I don't know how easy it would be for them to do it, but it is something that is being looked into. So as I move down the page...
Link screen dash reader user multiplicator get to sure. No thanks. Link plus you. Link Gmail. Link images. Link collapsed has pop-up apps.
There we go. I told you link collapse has pop-up apps. That's exactly what it says. Now, if I actually read that line,
home,
letter by letter,
P-A-P-P-S,
it only says the word apps. So the other information is purely JAWS messages.
Link sign edit.
So
Google search button.
Down,
edit. Link
I'm
sign in.
edit field.
Link collapsed has pop-up apps.
So I can then move up and down the page.
Link about.
I can press Control End, which is the command which most people would know to get to the bottom of a document.
Link business. Link about.
And I'm right down the bottom where it says about, etc., etc. So all of your reading commands, you Control Left and Right arrow, moving up and down, Control Home, Control End, page up, page down, all of those commands that you would be familiar with navigating documents are available here. So, along with a lot of other stuff. Now, at this point, I'm going to get some, Rebecca, if you can, to move the mouse and click on the edit box.
There you go, that should have happened.
Okay. This is what most of you would probably do at this point in time. Actually, before I go on with this, I'll stop again for questions, because I think that's a pretty good, I think that's basically as far as I can go with that part of the explanation. So we'll do a bit of a start. Any questions on any of this? Now, normally at this point, a mouse user would go into say something like this, would go into Google, click on the edit field, which is exactly what we've just done, and start typing. Okay, so I'm going to start typing. I'll start typing the word quantum, I'll look for our own homepage.
There are no regions on this page.
Oops.
Link screen dash reader users. Click here to turn off Google.
There are no radio buttons on this page.
Get to Google faster. Update your default search engine.
Now, I'm trying to type here, and JAWS is giving me all sorts of information. What's actually happening is when you're in virtual cursor mode, JAWS hijacks the keyboard. It steals all of the keys on, well, probably about 80% of the keys on the keyboard. Part of the reason it does that is so that you can wick around, so that you can fly around a page really, really, really quickly by looking for certain elements. Now, what I mean by an element is a part of a website, whether it be a block of text, whether it be a link, it could be an edit box, it could be a button, it could be a table, all sorts of stuff. All of those little bits and pieces that make up a web page are called elements. So at this point, pressing different letters on the keyboard when you're in virtual cursor mode, because you can't type in that mode, pressing certain letters on the keyboard will look for these different things. For example, pressing H will cycle you through all the headings on a page, etc., etc. But hang on a second, we clicked on the edit box. Well, that's the fun thing you can't do. JAWS does not track the mouse. So on a website, you can't click on the edit box with JAWS running and expect it to work. It won't. That is probably the single most confusing thing that we get a lot of questions on from people who are trying to work with JAWS users, and they instantly go to do that, which is fair enough. I'm sure if I was in that situation, I'd probably do exactly the same thing. And it confuses the hell out of people. So if you try it, it will not work. You can't do it that way. Now, you can click on links with a mouse, you can click on buttons, etc., etc., but you can't do it with edit boxes. It won't work. So they had to find a way around this problem. So the internet has two modes. You have the virtual cursor mode, which it's in by default. So that's the one that lets us move all over the page and actually have a look at the page and see what's going on. Forms mode. That's the one that actually lets you start typing in search queries or entering your name and address or whatever it is you happen to have to fill out. Any type of form, any sort of edit fields that you need to be able to get access to, you need to use forms mode for those. And that then frees up the keyboard for normal typing. So what we can do at this point in time, Google's loaded up. I'm at the top of the page. I can do one of two things here. I can either arrow down through all these links
edit
until it says the word edit, but that's too slow. That took me at least 3 seconds to do that. Too slow.
Google.
So let's go to the top of the page and let's press the letter E. Now these are called, that's the one thing I forgot to mention before, is these shortcuts, these where in the virtual cursor are called quick navigation keys, or navigation quick keys. Okay, so let's press E to look for edit fields.
Edit.
There we are, we're right onto it. I could have done that from anywhere on the page. So what I'll do is, because of the way JAWS works, that searches for different elements. So, okay, it's found the first edit box, but how do I know there aren't any more? I can find out. I can press it again.
Wrapping to top. Edit.
Okay, so we know there's no more. It says wrapping to top, so it's searched all the way down the page, realised there's no more, it's gone back to the top of the page, and has dropped me back onto the search edit box. Okay, so at this point, if I want to do a search, I need to go into forms mode. Now by default, JAWS is set up a little bit differently to the way I have it set up. And I've changed it slightly for this demonstration. There is a way to get JAWS to automatically go into forms mode. That is possible to do. Or you can have it set up this way where you have to do it manually. You know, I'm doing it manually purely for the purposes of this. If people want to know how to change it, get in contact. I'll be quite happy to go through that with you. Okay. So we're on the edit box. So from here, we press enter.
Enter. Forms mode on.
Secure connection.
Okay, so we've got a couple of things there. Forms mode on. Don't worry about it saying secure connection. That's just a message that it's getting back from Internet Explorer itself. So forms mode is on. We now know that I can start typing. So if I actually start to type now,
QUANTU space RLV.
that's actually typing properly, and we can verify that.
More. Link go to Google. Edit Quantum RLV.
Yep, okay, that's actually typing correctly. That's fine. Okay, so we want to do that as a search.
Enter. Forms mode on.
Secure connection.
End VLR. End.
Yep, so
VLR.
obviously with the cursor I can move through that. That's all fine. Now there's two things we can do here. We can either move off the edit field with the arrow keys, or, and this won't work on all pages, but it will work on Google, is pressing enter automatically presses the search button. So let's just press enter.
Forms mode off. Enter. Quantum RLV Google search. Edit. Quantum RLV.
So we now have a results page up. Google is designed really, really well. And I'll go into a little bit of information. There is a group of organizations, companies, whatever you want to call them, around called the World Wide Web Consortium. And they meet and they decide what are going to be basically standardizing the language, standardizing the tags, the HTML, all of that stuff that is used on the web page complies fully with their guidelines, and the World Wide Web Consortium is shortened to W3C, just to make life easier. If your web page complies fully with their guidelines, and keep in mind it's not mandatory, it's like a code of conduct. So you don't have to follow it if you don't want to. I think you'd be crazy not to, because if you don't, then you're probably just asking for more problems. And anyway, if you do follow it correctly, your page is about 99% likely to be fully compatible with JAWS and any other screen reader or magnifier. You shouldn't have any major issues with it. There may be a couple of minor problems, but you shouldn't have any major problems. Google's website is W3C compliant, and the way they've set it up is actually really, really good, because all of the search results, every one of them shows up as a heading. Okay, so there's two things we can do here. There's actually a few different ways we can go from this point in time. We've got a results page. Now I know they're all made up of headings, so I can use the letter H because
Virtual PC cursor.
I'm in virtual PC cursor mode. So I can use H to go through the results. H will search for headings.
Search results heading level 2.
Okay, there's my search results.
Quantum homepage heading level 3 link.
Okay, there's our home page. So from there I can just click on that. The command for doing that in JAWS is to either press the spacebar or pressing the enter key when you're on a link. I personally would get into the habit of using the spacebar just because it is the better way to go. Pressing enter doesn't necessarily do what you expect on a lot of pages. So the best habit to get into is to use the spacebar where you possibly can. So we can go through the different headings.
Contact us heading level 3 link. Second-hand equipment heading level 3 link. Low vision heading level 3 link.
And these are all headings that are hanging, basically all hanging off Quantum's website. So that's one way we can do it. The other way we can do it is we know that all of these results are headings. So let's bring up a list of headings.
Heading list dialog. Headings list view.
Okay, there we go. Basically, there is a way of bringing up lists of probably the more commonly used elements, and the main ones that JAWS handles are form fields, which are things like edit boxes, buttons, etc. List of headings and links list. They're the three most commonly used things that you can actually get up on here. So now we're in a standard list.
Home. Search
so we
results
can just move up the
:2.
list.
Quantum homepage :3. Contact us :3.
Okay. So basically it's saying contact us, and it's then telling me there's a colon after that, and then the number 3 is basically the heading level. You can have up to 6 what they call heading levels, and that's if you're using the heading tags that I explained about before. So JAWS is giving me that information.
Quantum homepage :3.
So if, for example, I wanted to go through the Quantum homepage, now by default,
Default button is moved to heading.
the default button is move to heading. So if I pressed enter at that point, all this is going to do is move the virtual cursor to the heading, which is exactly
Contact
what we want.
Quantum homepage :
So if I press enter,
enter. 1 heading level 3 link Quantum homepage.
I'm on that heading right now. So I can now press the space bar.
Space.
New tab page.
Quantum homepage heading level 3 link visited. One visited heading level.
Page has 12 headings and 45 links.
And there we go. There's our home page. Now, JAWS gave me some information there, and it will every time you load a page. It says page has 12 headings and 45 links. That tells me two things. Number one, it tells me the entire page is now loaded, because you can start reading a page before the whole thing is loaded. The problem with doing that is if you do start to do that, in a lot of cases, when the whole page has loaded, especially if there are changes that are made later on, you will be jumped back to the top of the page again. So probably until you get more experienced, it is probably a really, really good idea to actually wait until JAWS gives you that information. So it says we've got 12 headings, so we know we can search for headings, and it says we've got 45 links. Okay, so the 45 links isn't really all that important because I've seen pages with hundreds of links. Anybody who wants an example of that, go to telstra.com. And you'll probably see the link count in the hundreds. So there we go. That's it. We've done a search. We found what we're looking for, and we brought up a new page. So it looks daunting. It sounds complicated, but in actual fact, it's not. So let's just do something really, really quickly here. I told you before you can do a couple of things. We can either bring up a list of forms, fields.
Select a form field.
So let's do that.
Home. Unlabeled 1 edit search entire store here ...
Okay, so we've got an edit box here, search entire store.
Search button. Name edit.
We've got a search button.
Email edit.
And we've got a whole bunch of edit fields. All of these, and again.
Default button is OK.
Okay, so basically if I press one of these.
Phone edit.
Okay, so phone.
Enter. Phone edit. Forms mode on.
That's now put me straight down into where I can type in my phone number. So that's
Forms
a really,
mode
really,
off.
really quick way of doing it.
Quantum.
And the other one obviously is the list of links. So if we bring that up.
Links list dialog. Links list.
There's your 45 links. So we can move up and down all of those. Now, that's generally not a great idea to do that unless you know what you're looking for. I would never use this the first time I actually get to a page. Part of the reason for that is because some of these links can be really, really cryptic.
Newsletter. Events.
Okay, these ones are all
News.
fine. Newsletter,
FAQs.
events.
Contact us. My account. My cart.
But what can actually happen is you can get a whole bunch of links on a website that say click here. Okay,
Escape.
that's all the information you're going to get. All you'll get is all the click heres if you bring up that list. And you won't know what it's all about. So the first thing to do when you get onto a website, have a bit of a look around, have a bit of a read of it, see exactly what's going on, get a little bit of an idea of how the page is laid out and what JAWS has done to the page. Okay, so we'll stop at this point and ask if anyone has any more questions.
A question for you. When you virtual cursor,
Yep.
and you did something, it actually booted and you went into forms mode, and when you pressed, I think it was enter or space, it took you automatically to the virtual cursor again, or
It does,
did you
yeah.
actually? It does.
No. You can set JAWS up not to. I don't know why you would want to do that, but the option is there if you wanted to do it. But JAWS is smart enough that if you get onto a website, the virtual cursor mode is automatically turned on. You don't have to worry about turning that on. Where it's needed, it comes on automatically. So when a website reloads or when you actually change to another site, JAWS makes the assumption that you no longer want forms mode, so it turns it off, which in most cases is generally correct. You would very rarely ever want forms mode to carry on until to a whole new page. If you have the mode set up where JAWS can automatically enter and leave forms mode, then that's actually that situation will change slightly, but the way I have it set up here is purely for demonstration purposes, and it does make life a lot easier to have it set up where you need to get that audible input as to whether or not you're leaving or exiting forms. Well, any more questions on any of that?
There was another question, Danny, on the chat. How do you make use of the regions that you were talking about earlier?
Okay, the regions, if I...
Close document window, left parent.
That wasn't a good idea, that just closed the whole thing. Anyway,
Windows R,
just
run www here, O-O-G-A, here's O-M-U, enter, www,
reload
edit,
Google.
virtual key, Google.
Now, the regions are actually a really useful thing to know about because now in earlier versions of JAWS this was a slightly different keystroke. I'm using JAWS 15. If you're using something earlier, it uses the semicolon key when you're in virtual cursor mode. But if I want to switch directly to, and the Google website does have a region on it, which is the search region. Now I'm at the top.
Google, link screen dash Google.
So I'm at the bit where it says...
Link screen dash reader users,
where it
click
says
multiplication,
screen reader
link screen dash reader users, click here to...
where it says screen reader users, click here to turn off instant, all that type of stuff. Okay, so I'm on that part of the web page. So if I wanted to get directly to the search region, press the letter R.
There are no regions on this page.
And it's telling me there are no regions. It may depend on... That's odd because it was coming up with one before. The page is loading differently every time. That's really strange. There you go. There's more of the vagaries of the internet. Okay, so if there is a region on the page, that'll take you straight to it. If there isn't one, obviously you'll get a message which says something like,
There are no regions on this page.
So that's the easiest way to do it. Look, for a full list of these commands, probably the best thing I can suggest you do is one of two things. Either look in the JAWS help, or the other thing you can do is to use the JAWS keyboard help. If you're in virtual cursor mode, and actually if you're anywhere else, if you press your insert and the number 1 on the number row, so that's the row of numbers above your letters.
Keyboard help on.
You turn on keyboard help. Pressing it again turns it off. And then when you're in virtual cursor mode from here, I can start pressing letters.
H moves to the next heading on the page. A moves to the next radio button form field in a document or web page using the virtual cursor. F moves to the next form control on the page.
So all I'm doing there is just pressing the individual letters. I'd suggest you do that and have a bit of a play around with it to get an idea of which ones are which, but there is actually a full list of them in the JAWS help as well. And if anybody wants it, we can quite easily provide that list. I'm sure it would only take me a few minutes to write one up. There are probably about 20 or 30 of them, but it wouldn't take me a long time to actually
Keyboard
write one
help
up for doing that. Okay. The last thing I'm going to go through today... did we have any more questions at all, Rebecca, or is that lady?
Not that I've seen. I'll just briefly unmute everyone in case. Has anyone else got any questions? No, take that as a no. I'll just mute everyone and take you off, Danny, so I won't be once. Oh,
yeah.
Somebody's asked, how did you set up the regions? But I gather that would be over the web page.
Okay, the regions are all of this stuff is all set up as part of the actual web page itself. All I can do is configure JAWS or tell JAWS to give me information as to what's actually available on that website itself. There are ways of setting up what's called a place marker, and a lot of the stuff that you can do with JAWS is getting way more advanced than anything I had any intention of covering today. You can set up things like place markers, which is almost like a bookmark for a particular page. You can set up JAWS so that it will ignore certain parts of a page. So if you have, say, a newspaper with a whole lot of advertising, you can tell JAWS to ignore that, and what it'll do is when you're in the virtual cursor mode, it'll actually literally skip over it. You don't actually see that disappearing off the screen, but JAWS will ignore it. There's a lot of stuff you can do, and most of it is way, way more advanced than anything I was looking at covering today. So, as I said at the beginning, this is absolute basics. Introduction only. Okay, So the last thing I'm going to look at is to give people a little bit of an idea. I showed you before.
Alt tab, D left end, webinar.h, enter, JAWS and the internet dash.
This little page here.
Graphic quantum logo blank. Read this just as
If I go down to the bottom of it.
blank. Graphic quantum logo.
Okay. So JAWS is telling me graphic quantum logo. Okay. So that's a nicely labelled graphic. There's an alt text label on there. There's an alternative label so the screen readers can get an idea as to what's happening. What happens if you find something where there isn't an alt text label? What actually happens in that situation? Because you are going to come across a lot of websites that I've showed you all the nice ones today, the ones that are all really nicely formatted and everything reads all really, really nicely. You will come across sites that don't read nicely and that don't play well at all with JAWS. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't get around them, it just makes life a little bit more difficult. Now, for the most part, these guys have done their site really well, so I'm not dobbing them in.
Control O, open double period A T, here's O M J, enter, JAWS and the internet.
Okay.
Graphic escape. Control O, double period HP, here's O M U, enter, JAWS and the internet.
Now,
HP registered sign Australia vertical bar laptop computers, desktops, printers, servers, services and more.
Page has 5 headings and 82 links.
for the most part, HP's website is actually really good. But, and I say but because there are a couple of issues with it. And you will find those issues if you tell JAWS to search for graphics. And to do that in the virtual cursor mode, surprise, surprise, you would press the letter G. So let's go and have a look. Let's get to the top of the page and have a look and see what graphics are on this page.
Link graphic important notice about consumer rights.
Very good. That's a graphic link. Important notice about consumer rights. Yep, that one reads really, really nicely. Very good.
Link graphic HP registered sign Australia vertical bar laptop computers.
Yep. Not a problem with that one.
Graphic HPE underline or underline in underline HHO underline IPG underline or underline family underline 20,140,708B.
What? Right. Okay. We now come across a situation where
Link Australia store.
we have graphics that are not properly labelled. So what's effectively happening there is we have a graphic.
Graphic HPE underline or underline in underline HHO underline IPG underline or underline family underline 20,140,708B.
We have a graphic sitting there which does not have an alternative text label attached to it. So what JAWS is doing, and there's a couple of ways you can set this up, but what it'll do by default is it will then read out the actual file name for that graphic image. So that's an incredibly long, complicated, probably overly complicated file name which tells us nothing. It tells us absolutely nothing. In some cases it might tell us something useful. Sometimes we get really lucky and the graphics actually do tell us something useful. Okay, so that one's telling us nothing. We don't know what that is. We can't even guess as to what that is. Okay, so let's have a look and see what else we can find on here.
Link graphic HP on Facebook.
Okay, these are all fine.
Link graphic HP on Twitter.
So for the most part they've done a good job.
Wrapping to top. Link graphic important.
Okay, so there's just that one. But the problem is, what would happen if that was a link? Now as it happens it's not. But what would happen if it was? You wouldn't know where that was pointing you. You'd have no idea where that was pointing you. That could be sending you anywhere because it means nothing. Now, what you may see sometimes is you might see something like if you're looking through a website, you may get something, and I don't have an example of this unfortunately, but you may get something like it might say graphic, link graphic images / products. Okay, that's pretty obvious. Okay, they haven't labelled the graphic, but it's fairly obvious what will happen if you press that link. It's fairly obvious that that's going to take you to their products page. So sometimes you'll get lucky. Other times...
Link graphic HP registered graphic HPE underline or underline in underline HHO underline IP.
Not so much. So That's some of the downfalls. You will come across situations like that. It is going to happen. I guarantee you it will happen. And that is because they have not fully followed the W3C guidelines. Now, as I said, these are not compulsory. They are a code of conduct if you want. So you don't have to follow them. A lot of places do. A lot of web designers, and they should, but a lot of web designers don't know about them. They certainly should know about them. They should be made aware of them when they're actually learning the doing the courses. But unfortunately, there are a couple of places who don't actually teach that sort of stuff as part of their web design courses or the HTML courses. A lot of web designing these days is done using third-party programs, so you get very few people now who actually sit there and write the codes. Most people don't do that. Most people use actual software that will format everything and actually do it for you. So really just depends on how they've done it, whether or not that software does fully comply with those guidelines. Some of it does, some of it doesn't. So that'll give you a little bit of an idea of the sorts of things you are going to come across. Now, there is a way we can change that label.
Link at graphic HPE underline or
We can change that. So I can then bring up
HPE underline or underline in underline H graphic HP
okay, I can't do it in this case because it's not a link.
image map link or underline in underline home underline message underline L1 underline HHO underline shared
Okay, so we've got the thing is basically a mess. This whole section is basically a mess. So you're getting all sorts of information which is completely useless. Now in some cases you can change that. You can assign meaningful labels to them, but in some cases you can't actually do that. So just one of the pitfalls you are going to come across, because I guarantee you will at some point. Okay, do we have any questions on that?
Okay, people should be unmuted so you can ask questions.
Okay, well, for the most part, that's basically all I was planning on covering today. Now, we did receive emails from a couple of people with some questions in them. A couple of those questions I have answered today. Some of them were way more advanced than anything I wanted to get into today. And a couple of them weren't actually even relevant to the webinar at all that we are having today. So the ones that I will get answers to you, will actually get answers to you back by email to the people who did send them in. And if you wanted to have a chat with me about all of this sort of stuff, obviously we'll pass on my contact details, and I'm quite happy for you to give me a call and sort of talk through things with you. Someone was asking about internet banking. Depending on the site, yes, it can be done. Obviously, there's no way I can demonstrate it. But depending on how the website is designed, as I said, if it is designed properly, yes, it should be possible to do it. I do it myself, and I am a JAWS user for those people who weren't too sure. Have been a JAWS user since about 1997, and for about 15 years before that I was using other things. So trust me, yes, it can be done. Most of the banking websites are actually quite good. Facebook, yes, it can be done. It's a lot more complex, but if you know the basics, if you know your commands to get around a website, Facebook is possible as well. That was another question that we got. So once you've got that basic grounding, then the rest of it is pretty straightforward. Now, the last thing I'm going to go through...
Windows D, Disk S, U. Card 24, Alt Tab, Go to Meeting.
And unfortunately I don't
Alt Tab, Go to Meeting. Alt Tab, D left, Alt Tab, Desktop, Folder View List.
Okay.
Alt Tab, D left, Alt Tab, Desktop, Alt Tab, HP Registered Sign as your HP.
Right. I was slightly disorganized and actually didn't put this on the system, and I should have. Freedom Scientific has a couple of really good resources for people who want to actually look at this stuff, who want to do a little bit more reading up, and who want to know how all of this works. what we'll do is, for the people who came in, we'll actually send you a link to a couple of different things. One of them is a website called Surf's Up that they've set up, and that's basically a training site that will allow you to go through and have a look at the sorts of elements you can find on a page, how to interact with them. It'll give you tips on how to get around. It'll give you tips on navigating difficult pages. There's a lot of information on that. So definitely worth a look. That particular page is also used as examples by some of the audio training material that they have. And this is available as both MP3 and as DAISY downloads for people who are familiar with DAISY. For people who have DAISY players, it is available for that as well, but also as straight MP3s. And basically what that is a guy called Dan Clark, who's head of their training department, who goes through, you hear what he's saying, you hear what his JAWS is doing, and he'll actually explain it to you as well. So there are some really good resources out there in terms of what actually, how things work, you can interact with the different elements. Because even with what I showed you today, even with that really, really basic knowledge, you could get on the internet and start looking around. It's not difficult to do. With experience, you'll get better at it, you'll get quicker at it. And just another note too, one of the other questions that we had was, which internet browsers does JAWS work with? Now, an internet browser, for people who don't know, is something like Internet Explorer. That's what they class it as an internet browser. JAWS will work with 2 of them, and a third one kind of. So the ones that it directly will support, the ones that are directly supported is obviously Internet Explorer. That's all right. Yep, no problems. Okay, so the one that JAWS directly, the 2 that JAWS directly supports, Internet Explorer and Firefox. So you won't have any problems with those, it'll just work. One that kind of works that a lot of people are using, and some people are using it with a lot of success, but there are still some issues with it, is Google Chrome. So if people are feeling adventurous and want to have a bit of a play around with that, by all means do so, because you are going to get some fairly decent results out of that. You will have problems, but that's something that Google needs to fix. Basically, they haven't allowed as much access to the behind-the-scenes stuff, the off-screen model or the document object model, depending on which way it wants to do it. They haven't provided as much of that information as the other 2 have. So that's something that Google needs to fix, and they are aware of it. Apart from that, that's all I had planned on covering today. So if we have any questions to finish up.
Yeah, I'll just unmute everybody again. There we go. If anybody wants to ask any questions. Or...
Peter from Vision Australia. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're a bit quiet.
I'll try and speak up a bit. I just noticed you're talking about banking. There's ANZ, Commonwealth Bank and Westpac training guide on the Vision Australia website for anyone that's using those banks. They're training guides for JAWS. So you just search for banking in the Vision Australia website, which is just visionaustralia.org, and just type banking, and there's a few links there for ANZ, Commonwealth and Westpac.
Okay.
Yeah, there we go. That's all pretty useful to know. And
yeah.
What you'll actually find too, and I've actually seen this happen a couple of times, is a lot of the banks are using the same software for their website. A lot of the banks are basically using the same stuff. So you'll find very little difference. There may be slight differences in layout, but the general design of their websites for some of the banks is basically the same. And I've seen that happen with a few of them. So quite possible if those 3 work, then others will work as well. Yep.
Okay. Yep. Okay. Well, I might just, if that's everything with you, Danny, I might just grab the presentership back again.
No problems.
Okay. So, thank you, Danny, for that, and thanks to everyone for attending today's webinar. If you do think of further questions later on, or have any feedback about these webinars, or are interested in actually a demonstration or need some more assistance with JAWS, you can always contact us on either by phone on 1300 883 853, or you can email us at info@quantumrlv.com.au, or you can email myself or Danny individually. And you can always find some information on our website as well. I can also make available the information that Danny was talking about the resources that Freedom Scientific, the manufacturers of JAWS, produce, and where you can find that information. So thank you again for your interest, and we'll hopefully catch you at one of our next webinars. And so that is the end of the session.